Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Organizational Behavior class. In the next few minutes, I'll be going through an introduction to organizational behavior. So key things I will be talking about is number one, what is organizational behavior? What is the importance of studying organizational behavior? And then beyond that, what are the anchors of organizational behavior? And finally, what are the benefits to you as an individual in understanding how humans relate and behave within the organization? And two, what are the benefits to the organization itself in understanding the behavior of employees within the organization and how they can motivate everyone to potentially be as effective as possible. I'm going to start with the saying. Usually when we think about organizations, we always think they're so straightforward. How bad can it be? When you're really young, I would remember when my parents are going to work, all well dressed, and I'd always think, oh wow, this must be so interesting. I can imagine they just go in there, have fun, and then come back home with some money at the end of the month. However, organizations are not so straightforward. So it's not always about the inputs, the process, and the output. Usually there are a lot of components that are involved in the successful running of an organization. So what really happens is organizations are actually more like mazes where you're going left, right, back, forth. If you miss one particular outing, you have to go all the way back rather than being a straightforward journey from the beginning to the end. And because of how complex organizations are, it becomes more important for us to understand how people would behave within the organization and then how we as potential managers can help them to make the best out of their experience. So the next thing, we're going to go into a couple of definitions. First, before we go all the way forward, let's talk what is organizational behavior. Organizational behavior itself is the study of three different components. First, the study of individual behavior. So who am I as a person? My name is Debbie. How do I react to certain situations? What is my personality like? What are the key things I value as an individual? What are the things that motivate me as an individual? So first, the study of individual behavior, then the study of group processes. Now, Debbie never operates in isolation. So I'm most likely going to relate with other people. I'm most likely going to have team members. I'm most likely going to have people like managers that I have to listen to and I have to be part of conversations with. So beyond Debbie as an individual, how do people relate when they are within a group? What are the key things that will make a team functional? What are the dynamics between teams or between team members? So when you study the individual, the next part of organizational behavior is understanding the group processes, and finally understanding all of these things within the context of the organization you're operating with. So the way people would behave in, let's say, Google, for example, is most likely different from the way they behave in Shopify, or is most likely different from the way they behave in the 7-Eleven that is beside your houses or beside your homes. So what organizational behavior does is first break down the components of people or components of systems within the organization into the individual level, into the group level, and then finally into the context of the organization. And that is what organizational behavior is. And now, knowing that, what exactly are organizations? So that brings us to the next thing. When you think about organizations, it's not the building. So when we see BCIT, for example, the building or Burnaby campus is not the organization. For us to say something is an organization, or before we say this is an organization, key things we want to look at are, number one, there must be groups of people who are working interdependently toward some purpose. So it is not an organization if it is just one person, except this person is working with some outsourced team members or working with other individuals from the external perspective. So for you to say it's an organization, there must be a group of people. Now, not groups of people that are working on their own, so this person does whatever he likes, this person does whatever she likes. No, these groups of people have to be working interdependently. So my role and my job most likely would affect the next person. If I don't perform my task very well, the other person might not be able to perform their own task. So there must be that relationship between the task of the individuals for us to say it is an organization. And beyond that, there should be a collective sense of purpose. So if we don't all align, what is our goal? So in BCIT, for example, our goal is to ensure that we give you the best education as a student, and education that allows you to get the best job or have a fulfilling career afterwards. So every single person working in BCIT has that as the back of their mind. And so when they're thinking about what they need to do, I as an instructor, I'm thinking I need to make sure that my classes are as aligned as possible. I need to make sure my classes are as informed as possible so you can have access to enough information that would help you get the best out of your career. The administrative staff is thinking exactly the same thing. I need to make sure that all the forms are aligned so that you can have enough information that would help you get to your desired goal. The same thing as a librarian. So the librarian is thinking, I want to make sure that I have created a system within the library where people or students can access information that would help them fulfill their goal of getting a great job at the end of the study. So at the end of the day, when we think about organizations, it must be a group of people who are usually working together with the same purpose in a way that it is a give and take situation. So it's most likely a transactional form. I give my time, I give my energy in return for equity. I give my time, I give my energy in return for satisfaction. I give my time and energy in return for money. So all of these things must come together for us to say this is an organization. Now, based on that, why then do we need to study organizational behavior? From the individual's perspective, or rather, I'll divide it into two reasons why we need to study organizational behavior. Individuals, there's a benefit to you as an individual. Organizations, there's a benefit to the organization for the study of organizational behavior. So from the individual's perspective, the reason or the reasons why it's important for you to understand the basics of organizational behavior is, number one, it helps you to understand yourself and understand other people. So if I understand my personality, I understand your personality, I understand my characteristics, my values, and then I understand your own characteristics, your values, the things that motivate you. Now the next thing is I am able to predict how best to work with you or predict how you would behave in certain situations. So if I know you, for example, you like getting your work done early in the morning, for me to get the best out of you, I would have to ensure that I provide all the resources that would enable you to get your work done early in the morning. So what I am doing is I'm predicting how you would behave in certain situations. I know that if you have a clear task, chances are you'll be able to produce the best results. So me understanding you helps me to predict what you will do at every given situation, predict what my team members will do at every given situation, and at the end of the day, I most likely would use this to influence you as an individual to get the best out of you. So think about yourself as a manager. If you know the things that motivate your employees or your subordinates, you can use these things to influence the way they would engage within the organization. So you can help them achieve higher satisfaction, you can help them to be more motivated, you can help them to be more engaged because you understand their behavior, you understand the things that make them happy, you understand the things that make them put in the best work, and at the end of the day, you'd be able to get the best out of them. So from the individual's perspective, especially as a manager, a study of organizational behavior will help you understand people, understand yourself, predict how people would behave in different situations, and then finally, based on these two information, would help you influence the individuals to produce the best results ever. Now, from the organization's perspective, study of organizational behavior is so important. Because when you are able to analyze the behavior of people within your organization, you realize that you would be able to push more towards survival and success. So if I know what motivates people within my organization, if I put out a clear performance criteria So people know what to expect, employees know what to expect at every given time. If I focus a lot on things like employee development, which is a subset of organizational behavior, if I focus a lot on, attitudes and every other component of organizational behavior, what would happen is I would have more motivated employees. I'll have employees that align more with the vision of the organization. And so because of that, I would most likely have employees that are more engaged, and that would lead to a higher performance for the organization. That will lead to higher quality of products and services. And then in the long run, it is seen more as a green sign or a lighter sign for investment decisions. So investors these days will look at things like, oh, how are the employees treated in this organization? Oh, what is employee development like within this organization? Oh, what is learning like within this organization? And so when they can see all of these positive things, it becomes easier for them to invest in the organization because they know that in the long run, these things will be more profitable for the organization in general. Okay, now let's move on to the very juicy stuff. So, of course, now we already understand the importance of organizational behavior. Now the question is, why does it feel like all of a sudden the study of organizational behavior is so rampant? So, let's say 50 years ago, yes, it's important to understand how people behave. It's important to understand what motivates employees, what engagement is like, but it was not as rampant as it is in this time. And then now it's even worse post-COVID, but earlier it was, the need was there, but why exactly have we had just so much need to study organizational behavior? Now, the major reason why there's a higher need for organizational behavior is because the world keeps changing. There's so much unprecedented change in this time and age now. There's COVID. In the past, a lot of things have altered business decisions, altered business strategy, altered the way organizations are run. And so people are changing within the workplace. And if people are changing within the workplace, it becomes important for us to understand how those individuals behave so it's easier for us to predict and influence them. Now, the major drivers of change in the workplace over the past years have been globalization, workforce diversity, emerging employment development, and finally, technological innovation. I'm going to go through all of this one after the other, starting with globalization. So most of us have heard globalization over and over and over again. When we think about globalization, we're saying the interconnectedness of the world systems. So in simpler terms, what is happening in China today is going to affect businesses in Canada. What is happening in Iran today is most likely going to affect businesses in the United Kingdom. What is happening in, let's say, the United States today is most likely going to affect what is happening in any other country around the world. What that means is the world itself has become such a small village that so many changes would affect every little component compared to in the past when, whatever is happening in your own city is stuck with you. No other person knows about it because we didn't have the technology, we didn't have all the information that could pass around. Now, just aligned with globalization, what we have experienced is now workforce diversity. So many years ago, let's say 200, 300 years ago, if you go into a workplace, depends on where you're going to. Let's say you go into a manufacturing organization, you will most likely have 99% of the employees male, and male from probably, depending on where the organization is, male from potentially the same race. And so that meant that most people within that organization have the same way of thinking, have the same characteristics. So when we think about diversity, there are two angles to it. There's surface level diversity and there's deep level diversity. With surface level diversity, we're thinking about the observable demographics that you can see within an organization. So for example, men in an organization 3,000 years ago where it was dominantly men, there's not so much diversity in the sense that, okay, you want to go to the bathroom, we all know it's the same one bathroom. You know how they say men have a different type of joke that they crack? Someone will say, oh yeah, this, and everyone will laugh about it because it seemed very simple and seemed very similar. But as workforce started changing, you started having more women in the workplace. Not just women, you also have different age groups in the workplace. So in an organization, for example, you might have someone in their 20s. You would also have someone in their 40s. You also would have someone in, let's say, in their 60s. And all of these people from different age groups would have to work together. Also, you have different cultural backgrounds. So someone's ethnicity might be African, for example. Another person's ethnicity might be, or background might be, maybe you're European, for example. And all of these things would make our ways of thinking, our ways of behaving to be very different. So in where I work, for example, sometimes my colleagues are people that are, let's say, 60, 40 years older than me. And I have to understand their own perspective because we are working together to achieve the same goal within the organization. So when I say things like, oh, I'm on Instagram, I'm tweeting, they're looking at me like, what is that? What are you doing? Like, we know about Twitter, but we don't understand why it's such an important part of your life. So this diversity in the workforce would lead to a high level of differences in behavioral patterns within the organization. And for us to work together, it becomes more important for us to study organizational behavior and know how to work better with other people. The same thing aligns with emerging employment development. So a lot of people now, when you ask, what kind of job do you want? I want to work in a place that I can follow my passion. I want to work in a place where there's some level of work-life balance. I want to work in a place where I get one day off in the week, apart from the weekends, just to take care of my family. I want to work in a place where there's the potential to work remotely before COVID. So all of these things makes it a little bit more complex to work within the organization. Before it was easier. We are all working from the same time zone. We're all in the same space. No one has so much preferences, So there's so many things that have changed. And because of that, it's more important for us to understand how can we all work together despite the fact that half of my employees are maybe working remotely. Or despite the fact that everyone wants to have some sort of work-life balance, or despite the fact that people want to be more involved in the society while working in our organization. So all of these things have led to a deeper need for us to understand and study organizational behavior. And finally, technological innovation. The world of technology just keeps moving and growing and growing and growing. And so what that means is we as individuals have to also understand the impact of technology on the way we relate with people. So face to face, we can have this conversation. You can see my face. You know whether I'm smiling. You know whether I'm angry. And so it's easier for us to relate. But when I'm having a conversation with you by email, when I'm sending you a tweet, so I don't know if any of you would ever do this, but usually, you know how you write LOL or you put a laughing smiley, but your face is pretty much like this. So pretty much what is happening is you as an individual have to have a higher level of human understanding just because there's so much innovation in the workforce. And then now post-COVID, we've got into a space where it is even more complex. So I haven't seen any of my colleagues in almost a year. But yet, we still work hand in hand with each other. Yet, we still jump on Zoom calls, with some of us wearing corporate stuff up way, and then the other part, you don't want to know what the others are wearing. So all of these things would mean that there's going to be a need for us to understand human behavior even more because there's so many changes that are ongoing in the workforce. So what I have here are just some statistics to show you how technology has changed and improved in the workforce right now and how people are embracing it more. So for example, 78% out of 1,000 Canadians that were interviewed believe that workers would be more productive if they had additional internet and technology skills. Now, these statistics were taken in 2018. Imagine how it would be right now. Imagine if you don't know how to use Zoom. Imagine if you can't do a video call. Imagine if you can't send an email. Imagine if you cannot participate in classes online. What is going to happen is you most likely will not have any skill set that employers would need, and so that puts you at a disadvantage. So it's important for us to notice that if you look through all of these statistics, you can see that human resource managers are using social media to research their job candidates. So whenever I want to see someone or I'm meeting someone for the first time, I most likely will go on their LinkedIn, go on their Instagram, go on every social media platform just to have a better understanding of this individual. So technology has taken so much of a great place in the workforce that we have right now. And so as organizational behavior managers in future, we have to understand how this would affect the behavior of individuals within the organization. Now, I want us to think about this. So just think through this. Based on everything we've talked about, do you think the increasing workforce diversity in Canada will affect organizational behavior? So, age differences, ethnic differences, cultural differences, in terms of deep level thinking or deeper differences or deeper diversity, we have things like your personality. One person being introverted, another person being extroverted. The value system you have as individuals. Do you think these things would affect organizational behavior, how people would behave within the organization? If it will, why? And then finally, what effect do you think the recent technological changes post-COVID will have on organizational behavior? While you're thinking through that, I want us to go through what the anchors of organizational behavior knowledge is. So like everything in management science, most times, we didn't get the inspiration from our board. So we didn't just wake up one morning and say, I think it's important for us to study organizational behavior. We didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, you know what? It's good for us to see motivation as an important factor that will determine an employee's engagement within the organization. So what really happens in terms of management sciences is a lot of times the knowledge in any field comes from a place of gathered information from different criteria, so from different places. So what I'm saying is organizational behavior relies on a set of basic beliefs or knowledge structures, and these knowledge structures usually would serve as anchors of the knowledge and the principles on which organizational behavior is developed and defined. So out of these anchors, we have 4 different ones that I'm going to reflect through today. Just quickly breeze through all of them so you have a good understanding. The first one is the systemic research anchor. So what the systemic research anchor says is the knowledge of organizational behavior has come from a place of systemic research, systematic research. So it's come from a place of observation. It's come from a place of evidence. So over the years, we've noticed that employees would work harder or work smarter if there's more money involved. And so we've pitched that money might be a motivational factor for employees. Over the years, we realized that teams perform better if there's better cohesion within the group. And so over the years, we have aligned that, hey, whenever you want to set a team up, you want to make sure that there's a high level of cohesion, there's a high level of relationship between the team members, because then and only then would you see the most productive of employees. So that is what the systemic research anchor pretty much says. It says the knowledge of organizational behavior has come from a place of several years and decades of research, of learning, of evidence through which we have come to the conclusions that we have now. Then the next part is the multidisciplinary anchor. So with organizational behavior, like a lot of other sciences, it's not just from one field. There are different components to organizational behavior. So when we start talking about emotions, for example, we're going to take a leaf from the health sciences. There are certain areas that we'll start talking about that will take a leaf from the math sciences. There are certain areas we're going to start talking about that will take a leaf from the arts. There are certain areas in organizational behavior that will take a leaf from, let's say, engineering. So there's so many perspectives to a lot of things within organizational behavior. It's not just management science, it's more of a combination of several different areas to fall into or to create a background or a standing foot for what organizational behavior really is. Then there's a contingency anchor. So what the contingency anchor is saying to us is, for you to actually understand human behavior or how things operate within the organization, you don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. So how people would relate in, let's say, an organization in Canada is going to be different from how they might relate in an organization in, let's say, Nigeria. It will be different from how they relate in an organization in Greece or in any other place. So based on the specific situation you find yourself, the decisions you would make as a manager should ideally align to that specific situation. Yes, you can get information from evidence, you can get help from systemic research perspective, but you want to always put things into the context in which you find yourself in. And then finally, when it comes to organizational behavior, we have multiple levels of analysis. So what the multiple level of analysis is saying to us is, usually, like I said earlier, when we're studying organizational behavior, we'll look at it from the individual perspective. How does it affect you as an individual? How does it affect me as an individual? Then we look at it from the group perspective or team perspective. How does it affect my group? How does it affect my department? And then finally, we look at it from the organization-wide perspective, which is how does this relate within the organization that we find ourselves in. All right. Now, the next part, which is probably one of the most important part of the study of organizational behavior, is organizational effectiveness. So what this slide is pretty much telling us is the main reason why we actually study organizational behavior is for us to have an organization that is very effective, for us to have an organization that works, for us to have an organization that is able to get the best out of the environment they are working in and actually produce the best results ever. And so for us to understand organizational effectiveness, there are four several perspectives for us to say, this organization is actually effective. So there are four different things that we'll look at to determine how effective an organization is. And then the first one is open systems. So what really happens within organizations is no organization operates in isolation. So really, there's always the relationship between the external environment and the organization, because you get resources from the external environment, so you have to be aware of what is happening around you. So the best organizations are the ones that are easily able to adapt, the ones that are very flexible, the ones that are able to fit into the changing conditions. They're able to transform their inputs to outputs effectively and flexibly. Those are the organizations that are very effective. So let's bring this back to the organizational behavior perspective. In recent times, we've had things like Black Lives Matter. Now, if you look at what is happening with most of the top organizations in the world, what they are doing now is ensuring that there's some level of diversity within their workforce. And they're not waiting to be called out. They are doing it immediately. At least the very proactive organizations are doing it immediately. Now, when they do that immediately, what would happen is you have more motivated employees. You have access to more resources. People would see your organization as one that is actually aligned with the situation and the society and everything that is happening around you. And so you're able to quickly push through every barrier that is happening around you and actually push forward to become an effective organization. So with open systems, we're saying an organization that is able to easily fit into the environment, able to be flexible and efficient within the environment they operate is most likely going to be an effective organization. And this is as a result of the understanding of human behavior within the organization. Now, another angle to organizational effectiveness is organizational learning. So with organizational learning, what we're looking at is the knowledge, the skills, the resources that individuals have within an organization or that the organization has itself. So organizations that put a lot of emphasis on employee development, organizations that put a lot of emphasis on creating structures and systems that work in place, organizations that put a lot of emphasis on building the skill sets within the organization, those organizations are most likely going to have a higher learning or a higher knowledge management system, and therefore they are most likely going to be called or termed the most effective organization. And then thirdly, this aligns with organizational learning, is the high performance work practices. So the best organizations are the ones where the employees are not waiting for their managers to tell them what to do. So people have some level of autonomy. People have some level of discretion over their jobs. People feel a form of satisfaction and relationship with the organization. People are fast thinkers. They have a high level of human capital within the organization. When you have organizations that focus on these different characteristics or concepts, which are also aligned into organizational behavior, then you most likely will have an effective organization. And then finally, there's the stakeholders' perspective to organizational effectiveness. So when we think about stakeholders, we think about anyone that is affected or has an impact on the organization. So groups like your suppliers, like your customers, like the government, like the society, your employees, An effective organization is one that is able to work outrightly and perfectly well with all of these stakeholders. At the end of the day, the question is which one should you pay more attention to, but that's a longer conversation later on. But what I'm trying to say here is the stakeholders, how effective or how great a relationship you have with your different stakeholders, your ability to meet the needs and the demands of all your different stakeholders will determine how effective an organization you are. Okay, so those are the things that we would end up looking at as we keep going ahead over the next few weeks. But the most important thing is just to see a broad overview of the organizational behavior model. So at the end of the day, like we said, organizations are open systems. So open systems means that there's the input, this input is processed, and then finally there's the output, which can be the outcome or the effectiveness of the organization. And so what we have here is pretty much a model showing us how all of these different areas will link to each other. And these are the things that we're going to talk about in the course of this week. So in inputs, we're looking at what is the structure, what is the culture, what is the technology, what happens when it comes to change, what are our human resource practices, what is our strategy within this organization. All of these things will be coming down into two different perspectives, which is the individual perspective and the team perspective. From the individual, we're going to look at, okay, how does this structure affect the kind of personality, the values, the competencies that we have within the organization? How does this affect the motivation? What are the emotions and attitudes that employees have? What is the perception that employees have within this organization? What angle to self-leadership do they have? Now, these things, if well aligned, would determine what kind of individual outcome you have within the organization. So if there's great personality blend, there are high values that align with the organization, people are able to hold their emotions and are very motivated, you most likely would see a high performing individual. You most likely would see some level of organizational citizenship, a good well-being. People are more decisive and more creative and have more affiliation with the organization. The same thing from the team perspective. How do we design the teams? What is the task like? What is communication like? What is leadership within the team and within the organization? What is power like within this organization? What are politics? What is conflict? When conflict arises, how do we deal with it? How do we negotiate through this? Now, if all of these things are managed well, what you'd end up seeing is either a higher team performance, you'll see better team decisions, you see more collaborations, more social networks, and all of these things together would then lead on to organizational outcomes, which are the effectiveness. So if these things work very well, you have a good system fit, you realize that there's more learning within the organization, people are more performing, they're high-performing workers. You also will have satisfied stakeholders and highly ethical conduct. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be taking all of these different components. So for example, in the next class, we'll be talking through personality, talking through values, competencies, etc. And then we'll move on to all the different particular characteristics of organizational behavior, all with the focus of making sure that, number one, we understand ourselves, we understand the people we work with, we can easily then predict their behavior at different times, and then finally, this can end up leading to, a higher motivated team or leading to a good performing team in the long run. All right. So this is us done with an introduction to organizational behavior. If you have any question, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.